Hello YouTube, I'm Tom, and today I'm making tea boxes into futuristic shipping containers. Initially, the idea was to make the design and paint as simple as possible, to make loads of containers really quickly, but as usual, things spiraled a little. Shipping containers are recycled as much in the real world as in wargaming, with the humble Warhammer Munitorum containers being one of the most common kits I see in terrain making. As terrain, containers have the versatility that they can be used individually or in clusters to make larger structures, and I wanted to see if I could use my vast stocks of old tea boxes to make them at a fraction of the cost with mostly recycled materials. Originally, I didn't want any protruding parts, so that the containers could be stacked flush in any direction. However, I thought for the sake of the video, me bashing out loads of identical containers wasn't going to be very entertaining. So I added in some rings to add as optional extras. These would make them less versatile, but more interesting, and can be left off in subsequent builds for the bog standard versions later. As usual, all the design was sketched by hand, created in Illustrator, and then cut out on my Cricut. I have a whole video on how I do this if you'd like to know more. Once I had everything laid out and ready to go, I got started gluing all the parts together using wood glue and a silicone sculpting tool. To create the shapes I wanted, I used lots of overlaps, and that meant lots of layers to stick together. Here was the first point where I thought I might have gone a little over the top for a project that was meant to be super simple. If I had really wanted to make these en masse, less layers and less time gluing would have been helpful. As it was, I was enjoying the way they were coming together, and I think in terms of balance, a little more style might be worth a little more work after all. The top and bottom were designed to have pads that would look like nice design elements, but also lock together somewhat when stacked vertically. After the glue had dried, they all got a couple of coats of acrylic gesso primer. I experimented with first painting this on normally, then, before letting it dry, I stippled it with a brush. This had the effect of removing the brush strokes and creating a really nice subtle texture, and is something I will definitely do again when priming by hand. This is where I would have simply started painting them up, but for the first couple I couldn't just leave them bare and decided to have a play. Two of the containers were converted into food vendors. To do this, I ran a rod through the rings and used some corrugated card to make a small canopy. This was propped open by some more rod before I added some menus and repair plates made from serial card offcuts. I then used my standard nail art beads to add studs to most of the repairs, but made sure to leave them off the ends so it would still be possible to place these modded containers flush end to end. On the remaining two, I decided to add some hanging fabric. I cut up some old dried out baby wipes. These hold together really well when wet and make great fabric. I soaked each piece in a roughly 50-50 mix of wood glue and water, gave them a little wring out, and then draped them over another rod. Really, I wanted the fabric to hang down freely, but they wanted to cling to the sides of the containers. It's not the end of the world how they dried, but it does look a little bit off. Next, they all got an airbrushing in various muted colours, as I wanted the weathering to stand out. I then painted the canopies, plates and menus that would be a lighter colour off-white, before painting all the elements in a few different colours. I don't often get the wet palette out for this sort of thing, but it was so hot in the UK my paints were drying too quickly. After this, I added some details and gave the corrugated parts a light dry brushing of silver, before moving on to chipping. For this, I used my normal technique of sponging a brown-black onto the corners and edges. As usual, I tried to be restrained, but it was very hot and I think I totally overdid it. Or maybe more specifically, I made the chipping too uniform all over the container. This gave the effect of simultaneously making the chipping disappear and being overly prominent. I then moved on to the oil weathering. I'm going to blame the heat again, or perhaps the heat and the fumes, because I ended up not sticking to the plan here either. I'd planned to wash into the recesses and then clean up with a brush dampened in mineral spirits, but instead I thought I'd try using oils reductively. After a little drying time, and despite knowing this was not the best thing to use, I started wiping off the oils with a dampened piece of kitchen towel. I'll be honest, this seemed like a great idea for all of 30 seconds, but by then it was too late and I was locked in. I've watched enough YouTubers using the oil reductive method really effectively and should have followed their examples. You need less dilute oils, you need to apply them all over, and you're better off removing the oils with sponges or an old rag. In the end though, they didn't come out terribly, and once they're dried, I moved on to rust and additional weathering. For this, I used a mixture of Epsilon 502 oils, all diluted to a heavy wash. I applied these in the corners and as dots over patches of chipping. Again, I wanted to avoid making the spacing overly uniform, but again seemed to manage the opposite. Once the oils had a little time to dry, basically the time it took to get back to the first after doing all four, I used a brush dampened with mineral spirits to turn the dots into streaks and diffuse the edges of the larger patches. It's important to occasionally re-clean the brush and be very aware of how much liquid you have in the brush. You only want to move the paint around and not completely remove it. So, what started out with the goal of being quick and simple ended up being anything but. That said, I think they came out well, and with the addition of a bunch of less detailed crates and some less rogue oil application, I think they'll work really well as a group, and I've already had fun stacking them in a bunch of different ways. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed the video. See you next time, YouTube.